The young and the restless spoilers shocked Tracy Newman sat behind the wheel of her sleek black sedan, the morning light glinting off the polished hood. The highway stretched ahead like a promise, miles of open road that would carry her far from Genoa City, far from the suffocating web Martin had spun around her life. In her rearview mirror, the familiar skyline of her hometown receded, and with each passing mile, her chest tightened with a blend of hope and dread. She had made her decision the night before. A one-way ticket to Seattle, a small apartment overlooking Puget Sound, a fresh start. No more secret messages, no more whispered threats in the dark, no more Martin. She closed her eyes and pressed her forehead to the steering wheel for a moment, as if willing herself to summon the courage to drive on. Martin Spencer. He was the kind of man who wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a predator cloaked in charm and generosity. He had welcomed Tracy into his orbit under the guise of friendship and support. When her marriage to Danny fell apart, Martin was there with shoulder to cry on, with promises to help her pick up the pieces. But his kindness had a price. Soon she found herself owing him favors, small at first, then larger and more morally dubious. And when she hesitated or tried to push back, his generosity turned cold. He reminded her, in veiled threats and half-whispered warnings, that she owed him everything. "I won't be your pawn anymore," she had told him the night before, her voice trembling with both fear and resolve. "I'm leaving. I'm free." He had laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You don't get to leave, Tracy. Not until I say so." She remembered how his gaze had flicked to the framed photograph on his desk, hers and Danny's wedding day. She had always hated that picture, how it trapped her in a happier time she could never reclaim. But in Martin's office, it felt like a noose tightening around her neck. That morning, as she merged onto Interstate 94, she felt a flicker of triumph. She would be gone by lunchtime. No more late-night phone calls demanding she perform tasks she found increasingly abhorrent. No more messages slipped under her door telling her to stay in line. The first stretch of road was clear, the sun rising behind her like a beacon. She switched on the radio for company, soft rock, the kind she always found comforting. As she sang along quietly, the weight on her shoulders began to lift. Then, just beyond the exit for the airport, it happened. A sudden impact from behind, shattering glass, the roar of metal against metal, the scream of brakes. The world lurched violently, and Tracy's hands flew from the wheel. Her car spun, skidding across the asphalt, smoke and sparks trailing in its wake. She hit the median, ricocheted, and then the world went black. When Tracy came to, the hospital's fluorescent lights were harsh in her bleary vision. A nurse hovered over her, clipboard in hand, her expression a mask of professional concern. "Easy there, Ms. Newman," she said. "You've been in a bad crash. You're lucky to be alive." Tracy tried to speak, but her throat was raw and her head pounded. She blinked, trying to piece together what had happened. "I was driving," she croaked. "To the airport." The nurse nodded. "You were alone in the car. A truck rear-ended you at high speed. The driver took off. We haven't found him yet." Why would someone do that?" Tracy whispered, her pulse spiking. The nurse offered a polite, non-committal shrug. "Hit-and-run accidents happen. Sometimes drivers panic." But Tracy knew. She knew this wasn't random. The crash bore all the hallmarks of a deliberate attempt on her life. The way her rear bumper was crumpled inward, the trajectory of the impact, the fact that no skid marks led away from the scene, just a single car accelerating into her back and disappearing. Her heart pounded as memories flashed back, Martin's threats, the menacing undertone in his voice, the way he'd always insisted she obey. "If you ever try to cross me, I'll make sure you regret it," he'd said, his gaze hard and unblinking. Was he behind this? Over the next 48 hours, Tracy lay in a semi-conscious haze, her body bruised and battered, tubes feeding her fluids, monitors beeping steadily. Each time she drifted in and out of sleep, she dreamed of Martin's face, contorted with rage. She dreamed of his long fingers tightening around her throat, of his eyes alight with satisfaction. When she finally mustered the strength to sit up, the hospital room door swung open, and Jack Abbott strode in. His face, usually so composed and confident, was etched with worry. "Tracy," he said softly, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "I heard about the crash." She swallowed hard. "Jack, how did you find me?" He took her hand. "I got a call from the hospital. Someone must have recognized your license plate at the scene. I'm just glad you're alive." She squeezed his hand, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you." Jack's jaw tightened. This was no accident. She looked at him, fear and relief warring in her gaze. "I know." He leaned closer. "I've already talked to the police. They're treating it as attempted homicide. We're pulling your car's black box data, checking surveillance cameras along the route. We'll find whoever did this." Tracy's breath hitched. "But, do you think it was Martin?" Jack's eyes darkened. "He's the prime suspect. You told me what he's been doing, how he's controlled you, threatened you. He had every motive." A cold dread settled in her stomach. "I thought I could outrun him." Jack's grip tightened. "You can't. Not on your own. You need protection. I'm going to stay right here, as long as you need me." Later that evening, as Jack left to coordinate with the detectives, Tracy lay back on the pillow, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. But sleep would not come. Her mind replayed the crash in slow motion, the flash of headlights behind her, the thunderous impact, the world tilting sideways. She realized how close she had come to death. She realized that Martin's malice knew no bounds, and that if he thought she was dead, he might stop there. Or he might try again. Tomorrow, she vowed, she would speak to the police herself. She would give them every detail she had about Martin's threats, the messages he sent, the favors he demanded. She would bring every piece of evidence to light. And she would never drive alone again. She closed her eyes and imagined Jack's face, his concern, his unwavering determination. She knew he would do anything to keep her safe. But more than that, she knew she would no longer cower in fear. She would stand up, tell her story, and take back her life. As the night deepened and the hospital corridors fell silent, Tracy made a promise to herself: she would survive this. She would outsmart Martin's monstrous schemes. And she would find the strength to start over, this time, truly free. Jack and Diane arrived at the scene within minutes, their hearts pounding as they took in the chaos. The late afternoon light struggled to filter through the scattered debris and broken glass. In the midst of the wreckage, Tracy lay crumpled on the side of the road, her car mangled beyond recognition. Jack's eyes locked on the unconscious figure, and without hesitation, he rushed to her side. Diane, visibly distraught, followed closely. As she knelt beside Tracy, tears streamed down her cheeks in silent, unyielding sorrow. Each droplet seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. A mixture of deep affection and the agony of a love that had long been unfulfilled. Diane had known Tracy for years, sharing moments of laughter and pain, dreams and disappointments. In those tears, one could see the raw vulnerability of a woman who had endured a lifetime of heartache. Diane's eyes glistened with a pain that was not just for the immediate tragedy, but for the bitter realization of a love left unreciprocated. Her own loneliness had often been a silent companion, and seeing Tracy in this state was almost too much to bear. The anguish in Diane's heart was palpable. Her tears spoke of nights spent lying awake, wondering if happiness would ever find her, and of the deep scars left by relationships that had turned sour. Now, witnessing the ordeal of someone she cared about so deeply, her emotional torment intensified, reflecting a shared history of suffering and unmet needs. Jack, ever the protector, swiftly assessed the situation. "We need to get her to a hospital, now," he exclaimed, his voice tight with urgency. With practiced precision, he lifted Tracy, wrapping her carefully in a blanket he had retrieved from the back seat, and supported her as they made their way to his car. Diane followed, her eyes never leaving Tracy's pale, motionless face, as if willing her friend to awaken from this nightmare. At the hospital, the sterile corridors and the hum of medical machinery provided a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Tracy was rushed into the emergency room, where a team of doctors immediately took charge. After a flurry of activity and a series of quick assessments, one doctor finally approached Jack and Diane with a measured tone that brought both relief and uncertainty. "Tracy is unconscious, but her vital signs are stable," the doctor explained gently. "She's suffered significant trauma from the accident, but thankfully, it appears that her life isn't in danger. We're calling it a miracle that she's still with us." Jack exhaled sharply, relief mingling with the lingering adrenaline. However, beneath that relief was a simmering anger, a relentless need for justice. Diane's tears, although momentarily subsiding into a pained smile of gratitude, continued to mark her cheeks. They were a silent testimony to the deep bond she had with Tracy and a symbol of the profound love that had always gone unfulfilled, echoing the relentless sorrow of her own personal struggles. As the hospital staff worked to stabilize Tracy, a shadow lurked in the periphery, a figure watching the entire sequence of events unfold with a cold, calculating intensity. Martin, hidden behind a cluster of parked cars in a dimly lit corner, observed every detail with eyes that burned with fury. In the darkness, his anger was palpable. How dare fate, or perhaps someone orchestrating fate, not deliver the final blow he so meticulously planned? His twisted expectations had hinged on Tracy's demise, a neat resolution to the chaos he had engineered. Instead, here she was, alive but weakened, a living testament to his failure. The sheer audacity of her survival stoked the embers of his vengeful wrath. Martin's mind raced with dark, malignant possibilities. In the shadows, his presence was like a venomous specter, a predator silently calculating his next move. Every fiber of his being pulsated with a singular focus, to ensure that Tracy never escaped his grasp, and that her survival only deepened her entrapment in his web of control. The fact that the accident had not claimed her life filled him with a seething rage that was almost tangible, an anger that twisted his features into a mask of malevolence. Outside the hospital, the police had arrived to secure the scene and begin their investigation. Officers meticulously documented the aftermath of the accident, taking photographs, questioning witnesses, and collecting evidence from the wreckage. Their determination to uncover the truth was evident, as they combed through the details, trying to piece together whether this hit-and-run was truly an accident or a calculated act of violence. Rumors of Martin's involvement had begun to circulate among the officers, given his notorious reputation and the history of threats he had made towards Tracy. Detective Elena Martinez, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for leaving no stone unturned, led the case. She spoke to witnesses, reviewed surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras, and noted every peculiar detail. "It's too precise to be an accident," she confided to her partner, her voice low and measured. "There's a pattern here that suggests someone had planned this carefully." The theory that Martin might be involved was slowly gaining traction. Martin's modus operandi? His relentless manipulation, his history of threatening those who dared to defy him, matched the sinister undertones of the evidence. Detective Martinez was not yet ready to pin the blame squarely on him, but the circumstantial evidence was hard to ignore. She made it a priority to cross-reference all known associates of Martin, re-examine his past behavior, and determine whether he had the means and motive to orchestrate such a deliberate act. Meanwhile, in the shadows far from the prying eyes of the police, Martin's anger simmered and grew. Every new piece of evidence that might link him to the accident was another nail in his coffin of secrecy. He had planned for a scenario where Tracy's departure from Genoa City was final, a complete erasure of her from the world he dominated. Instead, her survival was a glaring error that threatened the integrity of his carefully constructed plans. In the dark recesses of his mind, he plotted a new course of action, one that would force Tracy back into his orbit whether she wished it or not. Back in the hospital, as the night deepened and the city outside was cloaked in silence, Jack and Diane sat vigil by Tracy's bedside. The sterile hum of the hospital was punctuated by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the occasional murmur of medical staff. Jack's hands, calloused from years of hardship, rested lightly on Diane's shoulder as they both stared at Tracy's motionless form. For them, this was more than an accident, it was a turning point. Tracy's survival was a second chance, a sliver of hope in an otherwise bleak narrative. Diane's tears had not ceased, they now mingled with a quiet resolve. "She's so precious," she whispered, her voice trembling with both sorrow and fierce protectiveness. "She's endured so much pain already, and I can't stand by and watch her be hurt again." Her own history of unrequited love and relentless suffering was etched into every line of her face, and every tear that fell carried the burden of a heart that had known too much loss. Jack nodded, his eyes reflecting both determination and an unspoken promise. "We'll protect her, no matter what it takes," he vowed. The words hung heavy in the air, a silent pledge to stand against the darkness that threatened to engulf Tracy's life. His mind raced with plans and contingencies. He knew that if Martin was indeed behind the accident, then the danger was far from over. The battle was only just beginning. The investigation continued relentlessly into the night. Detective Martinez's team worked to piece together the puzzle, a meticulous search for any detail that could reveal the truth. Fingerprints, tire tracks, and even the slightest smear of paint were catalogued and analyzed. Every minute detail was scrutinized in the hope that it would lead them closer to the mastermind behind the accident. The notion that Martin might be orchestrating these events lent an extra urgency to their work. They knew that the man they were dealing with was not merely a petty criminal, he was a calculated, dangerous force whose wrath could extend far beyond a single hit and run. In the days that followed, whispers of conspiracy began to ripple through the local community. Friends and acquaintances of Tracy expressed their disbelief that fate had allowed her to survive, given the sinister undercurrents that seemed to govern her life. Jack and Diane, now more determined than ever, rallied support from those who had been wronged by Martin in the past. Each conversation, each shared memory of his cruelty, only served to fuel their resolve to keep Tracy safe. As Tracy slowly regained consciousness in the hospital, the world around her was a haze of muffled voices and distant sounds. Her first sight was the worried face of Diane, whose eyes were still glistening with unshed tears, and Jack, whose steady gaze conveyed a promise of unwavering protection. Though weak and disoriented, Tracy managed a faint smile, a silent acknowledgement of the love and loyalty that surrounded her. In that moment, she realized that while her life had been nearly snuffed out, it was the strength of those who cared for her that had pulled her back from the brink. Yet, in the distance, Martin's dark figure remained unseen by all but the shadows. His fury, barely contained, was a grim reminder that his intentions were far from over. The man who had once promised protection and support was now the architect of a new terror, a terror that would challenge the bonds of love and loyalty, and force Tracy to confront the most dangerous adversary of all. In the quiet hours of that long night, as the hospital corridors emptied and the city outside settled into a wary silence, the stage was set for a battle of wills and hearts. Tracy's survival was no mere accident, it was a defiant act of fate, a refusal to be subdued by darkness. And as Jack, Diane, and the determined officers worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle of her near-tragic demise, one truth emerged with chilling clarity: the real war was just beginning, and the enemy lurked closer than anyone dared to imagine. In the days that followed, the investigation continued to unravel layers of deceit and treachery, each revelation a stark reminder that love, loyalty, and the fight for freedom were forces too powerful to be easily silenced. Diane's tears, a symbol of a love that had both nourished and haunted her, served as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the midst of overwhelming darkness, the human spirit could persevere. And as Jack and Diane vowed to stand guard over Tracy, their determination was matched only by the lurking, unyielding anger of Martin, a monster who had underestimated the strength of those who dared to fight for what was right. Thus, amid the clamor of an ongoing investigation and the silent promises made in hospital corridors, a new chapter in Tracy's life was written, a chapter defined by survival, the courage to defy tyranny, and the unbreakable bonds of those who refused to let love die.